Hi, good morning, Laura. I'm Christine Boschen, and I'm here with Laura Nakamura, who is running for Concord, California City Council District 5. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Christine, for having me.
I'm very happy to. So we are going to have a conversation basically about your interest in serving our community through City Council. And I emailed you a list of questions. And so we're going to just use these questions as a general framework for hearing from you. And as we go through the conversation, I might ask you follow-up questions, but we're basically following the list of questions.
Great.
So to start with,
Okay.
what led you to seek this office?
Thanks. In 2016, the traffic on Ignacio Valley Road, which is a major thoroughfare here in Concord, became so bad that to go 7 miles, it was taking almost 50 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain and my thinking of getting people out of their cars, I said, I have to be part of the solution. I can't be part of traffic anymore. I can't be considered traffic.
Were you,
So
Laura, sorry to interrupt you, was that your daily commute? Were you going from Concord into the Walnut Creek area?
yeah,
Okay.
so I live near the Concord Pavilion and I work at Shadelands.
Mm-hmm.
And my job actually moved a little bit closer from over near John Muir Hospital to
Mm-hmm.
Shadelands.
Mm-hmm.
And it became a more doable distance for me. When I do travel by bike, I don't go over Ignacio Valley. It's too fast to when the traffic is zipping along, but the roadway is just really, it's not a comfortable place to be.
So to back you up for a moment,
Yeah.
we skipped over that important piece, which is you decided you needed to be part of the solution, got out of your car and got onto a bike,
Yes,
right? So
yes, I'm
yeah.
sorry. I started bike commuting.
Okay.
And so by way of bike commuting, I figured out how to do it, how to get to work and become presentable so that for my day,
Mm-hmm.
I had everything incorporated to make sure that, that worked for me. And it was taking me the 10 miles that it does take me to get to work, was about the same amount of time in a car. And I was getting to work in a much better frame of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. I was like, okay, I want to really continue with this and meet other people who are doing it. And I really started thinking, God, everyone should be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
I was very obsessed with it. And then I met some people through Bike Concord, and they said, hey, come on down to a city council meeting. We need people to start advocating for safer streets in Concord. And I was like, okay, I'm there. So I showed up and made my first public comment at a city council meeting in the spring of 2016
Mm-hmm.
and got involved with doing more of that, and then started learning about other issues that were going on in Concord and other issues that needed more people showing up at council meetings with registering their opinion with the people who are making these decisions. We've got 5 council members, and if they're not hearing from the public, they don't know what public sentiment really is, if there's things that are really important to the daily lives of people who are in Concord. So I started getting into more advocacy work.
So biking. So you started with a personal observation. Wow, this is bad. This traffic is bad. How can I stop contributing to this collective habit and form a new personal habit that is going to be better for me, but also I can just feel like I'm putting a drop in the bucket, so to speak, or
Right.
you're putting a drop in the bucket. And then you found the bike people invited you to city council process, and then you started to become more aware of issues outside of your own personal sphere, it's sounding like, right? So what might be relevant to other members of our community, and how could you speak up and be a voice for them? And then and also just recognizing that the city council, 5 people can have their own eyes and ears to the world, but if they don't hear from more of us, then their ability to make good decisions for more of us is limited to what they already know and personally observe, right?
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
you're at this point being a more active, engaged resident of our city and hearing from more people around you, and then also speaking up on behalf of issues that you are noticing to be important.
Right. And I had been active in other ways in my community, through my church, through my children. Both of them were raised here in Concord, and I coached many years of soccer and helped manage soccer teams when they were playing soccer, and was always involved in their lives. And so that was a form of engagement and involvement. But on this other local level of making, the decisions that are being made in our city that affect families and residents, I was like, okay, this is a whole new perspective that I was starting to gain in 2016.
Okay, in 2016. So that's the birth of getting you to this point now where you're actually seeking office. So were there other key milestones between being active as someone speaking up at council to now you're running for council? Were there other key moments along your path that have helped you arrive here?
Yeah, there was. There was kind of a wake up moment too when I'm here. I am, middle-aged white suburban woman in Concord, um, getting on a bike and commuting and thinking, oh, this is great. We should do this. I That advocacy work kind of collided with people who were advocating for tenant protections, and I soon became aware of the fact that. Bike lanes in certain cities can have a gentrification effect.
What does that
And
mean?
it means that we can start, if you bring bike lanes to a neighborhood, if you improve parks before communities, especially in areas where there's a higher number of people who rent, it can cause displacement because all of a sudden you've got that gentrifying effect of, oh, this is a nice place, and landlords can start raising the rents, especially if we don't have limits on what's appropriate and what's acceptable and what's affordable for the people who live um, in those units, those rental units, houses, or apartments.
So you're seeing your very simple focus on biking is good. Let's have safer roads, better biking systems to, oh my goodness, I didn't want this to mean someone can't live where they live. I didn't want this to mean someone can't afford to be here in our city. So now your list of problems is expanding that you're trying to solve, right? So you went from Ignacio has too much traffic to, oh wow, we need to make sure people can afford to live here.
Right.
Okay.
Now, and it's really important too, because it can be complex. I was just a wake up moment for me. And I'm like, okay, in my own personal sphere, what can I do? I was starting to advocate for safer roadways. This is really important, especially in neighborhoods where you may have people who have to rely on walking and biking because they can't afford a car. And so having those bike lanes and that roadway infrastructure to keep all users safe was really important to me. So I didn't want to stop advocating for bikes, but I also decided, okay, well, I need to get involved in advocating for stabilization of our community and housing and more affordable housing.
Okay, so thank you. I think that the list of questions you and I both have here in front of us, I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of blur between answering one and answering another. So I'm going to just actually say the next two questions together.
Okay.
And then we can circle back if needed, but I think they are related because you've already started talking about this. The next question is, who is your base? And I hear you already talking about people on bicycles. I'm hearing you already talking about low-income residents. So who is your base? And then the next question, what are the important issues you will champion if elected? Can you weave those two together for us?
I think I can.
Okay.
First, I want to speak a little bit more about my base, because shortly after I started doing the advocacy work, I became part of a community of organizers and advocates and people who really wanted to be more engaged at the local level. And these were Concord residents, and we said, let's form an organization of Concord residents who want to be advocating for what we see as the way we want Concord to be going. And that included, empowering people to speak up, because it's not always an easy thing to do, but also educating people as to what was happening in the city. There were certain things that we were learning that a lot of people were like, how do you know all this? Because it's not always out there in regular channels that people are talking about. The city has a good way of putting out information, but not everyone is dialed into that. So
in terms of public, sorry to interrupt you. So there's a public notice process for decisions that are made at City Council and in other, maybe other sub committees of City Council. And yet that distribution of the topics to the people who may actually be impacted to them, that process may be incomplete, is what I'm hearing.
It is. There's certain things. So sorry. To give you an example, there was a developer who wanted to put a soccer stadium in downtown Concord. And this happened somewhere along, I think it was about 2019, we started getting wind of this. And so this group that I helped to form, it's Concord Communities Alliance, we said, well, let's get people engaged. Let's get people to know about this and ask their opinion, because if things were proceeding at the city council level and no one was engaged in that process, and sorry about the noise in the back.
Oh, no worries, no worries. We're having this conversation from your home and my home, so there will be squeaks and
doorbells and dogs. Yeah,
that's right.
And people knocking on the door.
Yeah.
So the where was I going? So Concord Communities Alliance is something that we founded in 2017. And then in 2019, we started we set up this big dry erase board at Toto Santos on Thursday nights and said, downtown soccer stadium. And we asked people, yes or no, do you want this? Is this something you want to see? And most people, we hardly came across anyone who knew about it, but most people were like, no. We had an 86% no rate to yes, because we were just asking, we were handing people dry erase markers to put up a tally, and we had it divided by which district do you live in. If you don't live in Concord, where do you live?
So when you said Toto Santos Thursday, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
I think most everyone knows that what you mean is at the farmers market, right? That, and like the summer season farmers market in the evening, that is also a music and dinner picnic event. So you're out there, and that draws quite a few members of our community. This was pre-pandemic, so people were still there.
Yeah.
And so you got a sense that it wasn't a widely popular idea.
Right. We were so the Music and Market series is incredibly popular. Thousands of people come out, and we set up a booth to just give information and ask people's opinion. And we invited people into a conversation, tell us what you think. And we were having some great conversations with people about the whole process. So that was one thing that we did to get people engaged. And so to go back to your question about who's my base, my base I see as Concord residents. And the people who I surround myself with are people who know about housing and transportation and land use. These are things that I consider as really formative in how I approach my role as a candidate for Concord City Council.
So it sounds to me like there's another noun in there besides base. There's the base is everyone here in Concord residents, you said.
Right.
And the team of advisors, there's people that know about transportation and housing. And was there one more that you mentioned? Transportation, housing, and
land use.
And land use.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the advisors. Those are the people that you're surrounding yourself with that are in the know and that are helping you be more in the know.
Yeah.
KNOW.
Yes. I mean, in the, these are organizations like Multi-Faith Action Coalition. It's an organization that tries to advocate for, not from, I'm sorry, tries to help communities in poverty and tries to address policies that can eliminate and help address those issues. East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy is another one. Raise the Roof is another one that does advocacy work for tenants. Concord Communities Alliance is one that I mentioned, and FAME, Faith Alliance for a Moral Economy, is another one. These are organizations that are kind of grounded in some of them are grounded in faith. They're faith-based. I'm a Catholic, and I have been involved at my church in that community there. So this is kind of, it's not necessarily my base, but it's who I am. That's who I am surrounding myself with.
Thank you. Thank you. And I even struggled asking that question, because my goal here is not to divide and say, well, you're over here, this is Laura's base, but just to have a better sense of where you're coming from. So I think you very eloquently done that. So thank you.
Yeah, when I saw that question, I was like, oh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, but I think it's a pretty common political concept, right? We have that concept when we think about running for office.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think you have touched a lot on the important issues that you would champion, but would you like to revisit that? So I'm hearing you're talking about affordable housing. I'm hearing you started the conversation with safe bike routes. So,
yeah.
And then would you like to add to that? Is there more?
The safe bike routes is one thing that I have seen in the past. I saw one candidate kind of get pigeonholed into like, well, that's all they want is just bike lanes. And that for me is, I've taken it, I see it as much more broad.
Okay.
It's my public safety issue. It is my climate issue. It is our roadways are what connect us to our daily lives. And it's like work, school, we have to have good roadways for all users, and they have to be safe. And we have to develop ways that if it's transit that we need to eliminate cars on the roadways, if it's more, safer bike lanes, walkable, we've got to really bring our city into a much more walkable, just for sustainability. I think that we will be a much more resilient city if we can do things with our roadway infrastructure and it's really thinking forward. And I think it will also create a safer place for residents in Concord. I'm part of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority's Vision Zero working group. And that's the Vision Zero, for people who aren't aware of it, is it's a kind of a thought process that is very comprehensive, how cities can look at, and even counties, what needs to happen on our roadways to eliminate deaths. And it's very important to me that we do.
We've had and continue to have deaths on our roadways. Of course, there's car accidents, but there are also bicycle and pedestrian fatal injuries that I can even think of some by name at this point. Yeah.
Jose Castillo is someone that I'd like to lift up right now. Just his death was so unnecessary. It was he was a high school student that was riding his bike home from school, and a red light runner hit him and killed him instantly. We had there was a memorial bike ride for him back in the spring. And the other thing is that since the pandemic, we have seen a greater incidence of vehicular violence on our roadways. And this is really troubling to me. And voters who I've talked to have also been really concerned about increase in not just, of course, the violence, but it's also a noise factor. There's there's a lot of, we're seeing more sideshow action in certain communities. And so there's noise, and it's just one thing I would love to see our community collectively calm our roadways and think about safety and all of the users of our roadways.
And, I just do want to bring in a little personal note how I first met you, Laura. So I started my bike commute from Concord to Walnut Creek in, I think, 2019.
Uh-huh.
And so there I was, I think it was my first day on the road, which I didn't plan it this way, but it was actually bike to work day. Like I just actually was ready that day to bike to work, but then lo and behold, like the whole world is celebrating and cheering me on. Like,
Yeah.
but there you were at the intersection of, I want to say, Treat and Navarone, and
Yep.
you said, "Hey, good morning, welcome to the commute." And I thought, wow, I was riding home yesterday and thinking, can you imagine that being done in a car? Like, hello, young driver. I see you just got your driver's license. Hello and welcome to the commute, right? Like that doesn't happen in a car. And yet there's something about the lack of barrier that we have between us and the world when we're on a bicycle that increases our own health, our own calmness, because there's the exercise, just letting go of extra energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it actually creates these moments of not road rage, but road welcome, road greeting,
Yeah.
So I understand why biking is part of that solution. And I hear you saying that it's not the only solution, and it's not even the only like goal, really, that there's mass transit, there's walking, there's, who knows, carpooling, there's different ways of evening out
Mm-hmm.
our transportation choices that create more physical safety in terms of the road rage or the incident, the accidents, but also a safer climate, as we're seeing here in California, and hearing about Florida with Ian just recently. Our climate is not what it used to be even just 10 years ago, which is quite a sobering.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us can avoid seeing that change.
Yeah, it's very concerning. Very concerning to me as well. And the thing about I do remember meeting you for the first time, and that's an intersection. It's so funny that was also, I mean, anytime you're on a bike, you're excited about it. I was so happy to like passing people. I have, there's regulars on the trail who I know and who know me now. And it's the Treat and Navarone is an intersection when I think about safety, it's like, oh, I would love for us to do something different with that intersection, because there's a lot of potential there for bad interaction between all the users there at that intersection. Red light running is one thing. You can just sit there and watch the people run the red lights.
So interesting how, and I think this speaks to what I'm hearing is your general approach, which is, if you can have your own firsthand experience, then you can bring that to city council, and you can also then put your ear to the ground to find out who else has their own firsthand experiences that can give city council the specifics that city council needs to make specific wise choices.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like the general, planning, higher level planning of that concept of you said something about vision zero.
Yeah.
So that's like a bigger picture framework. And yet it does come down to this intersection, that intersection, this neighborhood, that neighborhood, or even more specific, this regulation, that regulation. And the more that you are aware of those real world personal pinch points, whether it's for transportation or it's for housing or other issues that make our community livable, safe, the more specifics, the better. And then feeding that into the city council and then the other the committees and commissions that tier off of city council. So that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, there's also speaking of bikes, there is a bicycle pedestrian advisory committee that helps to advise, not just at the council level, but just the transportation department. And there's other commissions. One of the other ones that I'm appointed to is the Concord, it's Concord's Community Services Commission, and it deals with the community development block grants that the city receives, and how we take a look at assessing nonprofits for funding for their projects and their work.
Oh, wow.
In Concord, and for the people who Concord, people who live in Concord. and groups that for different reasons qualify to need additional funding for their programs.
I didn't realize that that was something that happened. That's really neat and interesting. So the city receives money. Is that coming from federal government? Where is that money coming from? And then they get to distribute?
It's coming from federal funding. I think some of it might be state funding as well. This year there was about, I think that it was like between $600,000 and $700,000 that 25 organizations were requesting money from, and it's a pretty involved process of you've got to, these organizations need help with grant writing. They have a program, they have to specify how that funding is going to be used, who the recipients are going to be, and what the metrics are for proving that what they're doing is working and meeting the needs of their community of interest.
So there's an accountability system built in that you're following the steps.
Right.
Right, thank you. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to just touch back on our questions here. So let's skip to question 5 and then come back to question 4. So
okay.
Please describe the city council decision-making process in place currently and how you participate. So I think you've talked about how you participate, but can you talk a little bit more about what is the decision-making process?
Thank you. Yeah, I've done, just to reiterate what I've done, I've been part of public comment. I've written letters to city council members. I have met with city council members just individually and as in groups. And what happens, I mean, that part of the public input process is something that all residents can do. All residents can get engaged and do that. What the city council is 5 members from the community. We've got 5 districts because in 2018, the Concord, city of Concord went from this at-large elected process to district-wide districting. And so we have 5 representatives. Every decision that they make needs 3 votes to pass. And in order to get a policy or an issue on the table in front of the city council member, it has to go through an agendizing process. And it's my understanding that nothing gets agendized without knowing that there's already 3 votes in support of that, whatever that issue is in policy. And so at that point,
sorry to interrupt you, who makes the decision about what topic gets on the agenda? So you're saying it doesn't get agendized unless there's already that level of support for it. So who decides what to put on the agenda?
I think that some of that work comes from some of the committees, like the HED, the Housing and Economic Development Committee can put something onto the city council's agenda. The city manager has a lot of input as to what gets onto the agenda. Policy, there's a PDNIO, Policy Development and Internal Operations, I think is what the acronym stands for. They're currently, and it's actually next week, they're going to be looking at a policy that has to do with stopping the sale of flavored tobacco and vaping products in our city. And this is something that I do feel strongly about. This is an issue where we're kind of segueing into an issue here. But that's an issue that I think needs to get in front of the city council. The PDNIO committee will recommend it back to the council. And that's one way things get agendized.
So I guess what the mystery that I'm still trying to put my finger on here is, you've got these different committees that are suggesting to city council, we think you should talk about this.
Right.
There's a city manager, right? An assistant city manager. And then there's council, and then council rotates a mayor. There's someone who, of those 5 people, is a mayor at any particular point in time. Who has the final call? Which human being or which position has the final call of, okay, here's the 15 items that have been recommended to us, and here's the 10 slots that we're going to fill. I'm going to cut these 5, or we're going to cut these 5. Who makes that call?
So there's sort of two answers. I think that the city manager has a lot to do with what gets onto the agenda, but the council also sets priorities.
Okay.
And they have a goal setting or a priority setting session that happens in the spring for the coming year, and they set their priorities. They have to be very careful about how these priorities are set, because a lot of it involves staff time and resources. And right now we're facing a bit of a labor shortage, like a lot of places. And so the council has to also take into consideration, when something gets onto the agenda, what the impact is going to be to the city and the resources and staffing. Is staff tied up with, right now, they're tied up with a housing element that has to be done. And so that's a major project that is taking up a lot of time with the city staff. So what other issues are really urgent?
Right.
So there can be urgency issues that would take priority. So that's, I think, did I answer your question there?
Thank you. Well, I think you're giving all of us a real world window into the fact that life is complicated. You know, and like we're all used to managing our own personal life, which is totally complicated for any one of us. But now you add that it's a city, and there's however many thousands there are of us, 100-something thousand people here, and then limited staff and limited time and limited bandwidth. And so what you're saying is, it's a thought process that happens collectively amongst city leaders, which include the administrative side, which is the city manager and their staff, because you think a city manager being the head of the staff of the city, and then the city council, and they're the elected leaders. And it's what's important, what do we need to be thinking about is important, and then also what can we do, what's practical, and some kind of meeting they're in between. So
yeah, Christine, one thing that I can just to talk about, let's talk about homelessness right now. We have a lot of people. We've got up to 500 people who are unsheltered on our streets in Concord. And the city council has recently decided we're going to go into a planning process of coming up with a strategic plan. It's going to be a 1-year process, because they're going to need engagement from the community. There will be stakeholders that are involved in developing that process of coming up with, hopefully, what will lead into solutions. And I really want to be part of that process, what the solutions look like. My frustration is that it doesn't help people who are sleeping on the streets tonight. And so we're still 1 year away from getting to anything that might look like solutions. The process, as I understand it, 2 years ago, when we headed into the pandemic, there were a lot of people in Concord. Everyone was told shelter in place.
Right.
And that included not disrupting the encampments. And I became involved with some people. Actually, Concord Communities Alliance started doing more and more advocacy for the homeless. And we started organizing and trying to get more people to become aware of the problem, that we have people sleeping on our streets. And the advocacy groups really got engaged on this. And I don't think we would be looking at a strategic plan had there not been all this energy that got us to this point of advocating and bringing it forward to the city council and saying, this is a problem. There are so many things that have happened to get us to the point of, okay, now we're going to come up with a strategic plan. But I really think that people like Adi Alvera with Concord Communities Alliance did an amazing job with really pushing hard to get this in front of the city council.
Okay, so there's love, there's intention, there's concern that matters, and collectively a groundswelling of all those things together, and persistence. I'm hearing persistence as well. Is a very important part of it. So that's one important issue. So we were asking you, what are the important issues you will champion if elected? And so I'm hearing helping people be housed. And the myriad of other issues that that are related to that.
Yeah,
is essential.
I don't agree with our current policy of sweeping the encampments without having a good, suitable place for people to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes for their belongings,
Mm-hmm.
and if they've got pets with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a waste of our police resources, and I think it's a waste of taxpayer dollars to just, it's too disruptive and it doesn't solve anything.
So Laura, so taking this specific example, how does city council, like what specific types of decisions come in front of city council that then turn around and have a real world impact on those specific issues that you're talking about? So you're talking about there's a current policy and practice of clearing out encampments.
Mm-hmm.
So having a place to go for the human, for the pet, and for the belongings. What can city council do about that? Does city council write a law? Does city council set funds aside? What does city council have in front of them in terms of a toolbox?
Right now we have in the toolbox, we've got $5.4 million. And I think that the strategic plan is to come up with something that will take that money and put it into good use.
Can you tell us what that $5.4 million is? What pot of money is that?
Part of it is from the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act. And some of it, I'm trying to figure out in my, there was another number where that money came from, but I know right now it adds up to 5.4 and I don't have it at the tip of my.
So it's a pot of money that the city has
Yes.
that is earmarked for dealing with
the unsheltered neighbors. Yeah.
Okay. So city council gets to decide where that money goes. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right. And how it gets spent.
And that's the strategic plan that is deciding how that money gets spent.
Right.
That's powerful.
It's very powerful. Yeah.
And
I hope it results in something big and good. There are lots of cities that have tackled this. We look at Eugene, Oregon. They have these great, and I don't want to say that like a shed is appropriate housing for anyone, but I think that if you look at it, how some communities have these enclosed encampments that are secure and have the support of police and fire departments, I think that it is much better than having encampments spread up in areas that are just really dangerous and unsafe. And I know that there are a lot of people in Concord who are concerned about the look and feel of encampments and the trash. And I hear that. I understand
and probably
that.
also the drug needles and the excrement and
Yeah. And if we know that's a reality.
Yeah.
And so therefore I would like to see solutions where we do say, okay, this is a reality. People are sleeping on our streets. Let's centralize so that we can somehow offer wraparound services in the form of, if someone wants to get sober, wants a program, they can be like, got it. Let's get you a bed. We have a bed for you that you're ready for that. Let's do it. Right now, there's no way to offer wraparound services. We have
a wraparound service. Sorry to interrupt you, but can you explain that term a little bit? I'm getting a sense of it by the example you just gave, but what is it?
Social workers, people who are offering help with rehab, if that's what people want. If people are need help with finding jobs, a lot of people who are sleeping on our streets do have jobs, but it might be, how do we hook them up with housing and resources so that where they've landed is something that's, what it's like looking at people's specific needs and saying, okay, we can't make, one approach doesn't work for everyone because everyone has very different specific needs.
So you're looking to establish a process. You're looking to establish connections of needs to resources, existing groups that are already ready to provide with those that need the providing. and then plugging in resources effectively and strategically to augment what needs augmenting in order to make improvements.
Yeah.
And that process is happening in the upcoming term, correct? So if you are elected to city council, then you would participate as a council person in that process this upcoming term. I'm just holding up the list of questions because I think you just ticked off a few of these. So let me just see where we are. And also, Laura, this list of questions will be posted along with this conversation, so everyone listening along can have it in front of them as well. So those are important issues you're going to champion if elected. And then you were describing city council decision-making process in place currently and how you already participate. And so I think that this is related to question 7, which is, what are the up to 3 most important decisions to make in this office term, and how will they impact our community through the next 5, 10, and 50 years? And I don't mean that you have to have a crystal ball, like I know exactly what's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years, 50, but more just understanding how, as we make decisions as a community through our city council process, we put into place real world things, like physical structures and also social organizational structures that impact how we live now and living into the future. So you're talking about helping people get off the street, and you were starting to talk about not just the physical aspect of that, but also the emotional and the mental health aspect of that, the employment aspect of that. And you've already talked about transportation, and its tie into public safety, and also the ability to get around and live our daily lives and run our daily economies, and how that is intimately related to climate stability. And so we've heard those. Do you have other issues that you want to bring to the forefront in terms of how people are thinking about you as a candidate?
Yeah, I think that what's really important as we're moving forward 10, 15, 20, even longer years, I think everyone's aware of the fact that our climate climate change is our existential threat. And so we need to be making decisions at the city council level that acknowledge that that's the future. And that we have to be making better policy decisions whenever possible. If there's a policy in front of us, and this is how my thought process, thought process that I will hope to bring to the city council, is that, first of all, who's burdened?
Who's burdened? Okay.
Who's benefited? Who benefits from this decision? Who's burdened? And does this get us into the future in a sustainable way?
And this is such an interesting question when you're thinking about climate, because those that might benefit, there's no free lunch anymore. We're all burdened. Every single one of us are burdened, but there's different degrees of being burdened, correct? Like some people are feeling it more acutely.
Right. But there are people who may benefit more, but we have to make sure that we understand the impact of our decisions. Recently, the city council made a decision, this was a week or 2 ago, the police needed new vehicles. And one member from the community pointed out that they could be doing hybrid vehicles. They could have gone the hybrid route, and they opted not to. And those cars, I don't know what the lifespan of a car is for a police vehicle, but I think that we had an opportunity in that moment to make a green decision. And I just think we should have taken it.
So you're looking at a big picture question or big picture issue and bringing it down to minute and everyday decisions.
Yeah.
So having that lens of who benefits, who's impacted, or who's impacted, who benefits, and the greater good, and how this little decision or big decision pushes us in one direction or pushes us in another direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you. I'm just,
sure.
I'm just checking in again with where we are. So, um, so you're talking about what's the process looking forward and how climate change is the existential issue of our time. And, as I've lived here for 20 years, I'm 50 years old, right? So I remember childhood in Colorado where all the trees were still alive. And now if I go back and visit, many, many forest upon forest, mountain upon mountain of pine trees are dead.
Yeah.
In my lifetime. And then, moving in here 20 years ago, 22 years ago, weather was pleasant, right? And now summer has been renamed as fire season. So that's just here, my little life snippet. So I hear what you're saying. It's existential. I want to just bring in a segue concept that's not on this list at all, but it feels to me very important for these questions at hand: homelessness and climate change. I think about the grief process that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross laid out of when something bad is happening or someone's dying, right? Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And these are such big issues. Homelessness, there's a lot of people that don't want to acknowledge it, right? There's the denial factor, or maybe they don't want to acknowledge that when you sweep a camp, you're sweeping lives, right? It feels like, let's just clean it up. It's not, oh my goodness, we're creating another wave of trauma here. There's a denial aspect there. Climate change, it surprises me how there's denial, because there's so many, we're all experiencing it now. We've had our skies darkened with smoke for weeks. It was 115 degrees here a month ago. And yet it still feels like there's an element of denial. So I want to also ask you, and as a faith-based person, what element of comfort might you also provide as a city council person that helps our community collectively and your fellow decision makers get past the grief and into the acceptance mode, where I feel like acceptance is where we start making acceptance is where we are able to start grappling and dealing and managing and making decisions that create a positive direction. How do you help? That, I guess that is a fancier way of asking you, how would you describe your negotiation style? Question number 6.
I don't know if those two go together.
Okay. So like maybe they don't.
Yeah, let's talk about grief.
Yeah.
I'm married to someone who's a chaplain, a hospital chaplain. I'm a healthcare worker. I spend time at bedside with patients who are going through sometimes really difficult stuff. And this includes end of life, and it's actually new life all the way to end of life. And so I am familiar with the grief process. And
so you've seen it, you've been around it. Have you seen
it?
These different.
I've talked to people. I actually, knocking on a door recently, I had a gentleman start crying. And we stopped for a moment with my process, what I was there to share with him. And I was like, okay, this is not a moment for talking about politics. This is a moment for being human. And we need to be having dialogue with each other. We need to be talking with each other and being engaged and bringing things down to a very personal level and connecting. And I think that is where we will make the most impact on the lives of our neighbors, whether they're sheltered or unsheltered, whether they're elderly, whether they're struggling to find a job. It's how we interact with each other on a day-to-day basis. And I think it also has a lot to do with the violence that we're seeing on our roadways. And people, even the violence with guns, that people are hurting.
People are really hurting, and you took it to the same place that I was taking it in my head too, actually, because you said the gentleman opened his door and he was in tears, and you said, I need to get out of politics kind of thought process or space and into human space. And honestly, we need to do that, right? Like that's what politics needs the most, is just exactly that. And that's why I reached out to you and to Tim to say, hey, can we sit down and have a conversation so that neighbors can hear and be in this conversation with you, with the other person running for office, and eventually whoever gets that seat, right? And when we're in a car, when we have access to a gun, we can stay in that really elevated, just super upset place, right? But what if there's someone who can sit with us and help us calm down? What if there's someone who can pause? What if there's someone who can listen? What if there's someone who can just be there? And the more that we can do that, the more opportunity opens up for us to actually help each other, is what I'm feeling, and also hearing from you.
Yeah, we're not only are we living in a time of where there's grief, the pandemic really changed how we interact, and it changed a lot of lives. And there's this thing called I'm going to forget that there's a type of grief where it's kind of like you've lost something, something's changed. You can't put your finger on it, but it exists.
Like, is that word ennui?
Oh,
Like, I'm just trying to find that word, or that
it's a intangible loss. And I'm going to take it back to a family story. When my mom had stomach cancer, they took her whole stomach, and she recovered, and she lived 5 years beyond that. But the change to the lifestyle between her and my father was drastically changed. And even though we didn't lose anyone, there was an intangible loss there that needed to be grieved.
right.
And I don't think that people recognize these situations where grief exists, or the opportunity to recognize that there's been a loss, that we don't sit back and say, okay, what was that? What was the impact? And really acknowledge it. We're so in this society, we are so trained to push through, and what's next on the list, what's next on the to-do list. There's the demands that come at us day to day are overwhelming at times. The new lingo seems to be capacity. What capacity do I have?
And so what you're saying is there's a pause point that needs to happen. And I'm thinking that there's a grieving that needs to happen on a communal basis for our car culture. The automobile is very much involved in the post-World War II boom of building our communities. Like Concord is mostly built from that point forward, right? So we built around this really fun extravagance, right? A car is a really fun extravagance.
It is, yeah.
And we built our world around that. And there's a lot of people that really love their cars. Yeah. There's a deep connection we have with our sense of freedom that we attach. That concept of freedom, we tend to attach it to an automobile-centered lifestyle. I can go wherever I want. I can go as far as I want. So I think we need to grieve that. And I think, grieving having a city where it feels safe and there aren't people that are so down and out that their lives are a shamble on our sidewalks. I think there's a grieving that people need to be able to do for that too.
Yeah. And you talked about the trees. And one thing I've noticed, this isn't Colorado, but the trees I have noticed, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, that you drive down the street and you can see the X's on the trees. They're being marked for being taken down. We have so many of our very tall, they're pines or redwoods. They're having to come down. They're dying.
Yeah.
There's a corner at the corner of Ignatia Valley and Clayton Road where there's a condo complex, and it's kind of bordered by at least 20 trees. And I keep seeing them and wondering when are they going to have to come down? And when will we see more sky? I can look out my window and see more sky than I used to. And that tells me a lot about how many trees we're losing.
And you also spoke of, so there's a planning process that goes into condos or whatever other development, and a focus on keeping trees rather than allowing them to be cut down, I think is also a city council type of decision, or maybe planning commission sort of decision. I show my cards as being very, very one-sided in the direction of supporting trees. I think I am not neutral on that topic, and I should just be transparent. Yeah.
Yeah, if we can save them, that would be fantastic. Many of them are looking so brown that it concerns me.
Right.
Because we lose our trees, we lose our shade, and our world on the ground here heats up.
And our carbon cycle gets even more out of balance. So yeah, so trees, transportation, housing, all really important decision points that you are bringing up. I think we've touched on most of the questions, Laura. There's one more that we haven't touched on, and I do also want to give you a chance to just speak what you still came to this conversation wanting to share. But let's go to that question 4 about looking backwards. I don't mean to ask you to be a historian, but I do just invite you to reflect on the city that we live in and some decisions, whether you are aware of the actual point in time they were made and how they came to be, or you just notice them because you live here. Mm-hmm. What decisions have been made by the predecessors in city council over the past 50 or so years that create the world that we live in right now? What are you grateful for in how they've built the city of Concord to what it is right now? And what would you wish that they could have done differently or decided differently, looking backwards?
I'm gonna try and remember all of those.
It just basically, you're here, you're living in the community that was put together with the imagination process and decision making process of those that came before. Yeah. What are you grateful for, and what would you like to have been done differently, looking past?
I'm grateful that I have an opportunity to run for city council in a city that I love. I was able to take part in a great program that the city needs to bring back soon. I think as we come out of the pandemic, these things will start to happen again. But in 2018, I went through the Concord Community Institute. So they give 25 residents at a time an opportunity to take 6 weeks of learning about our city and our processes and all the departments and staff and everything that kind of goes on behind the scenes, that it's kind of removed from the city council and the city council chambers, but it's everyone else who runs our city. And we're a service organization. We're here to take care of our roadways and needs of the community, the infrastructure of the city.
Well, that's fantastic. Is there any particular person that you know was key in bringing that program into being or running it? Can we say a particular shout out, thank you to anybody?
I don't know who's responsible for it. I think that I think it goes back several years, so it may have predate the current city manager. Mm-hmm. But it's something that they offered it twice a year. Wow. And it really gives you this sense of what goes into running a city. And that I was really, really grateful to go through that. And, wow, how cool. And actually made really fun connections with many of the members of that cohort that I was part of. And we're still in touch, and that's a lot of fun.
Wow. Thank you. That's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I think as we go forward, I think I'm grateful for the fact that Concord has 2 BART stations. Not many cities can boast that. And I'd like to see us, take advantage as we think about the future of that transit right here in our city, developing transit-oriented space, housing, affordable housing, so that we can get more cars off the streets. And we can create more housing, which we need, but possibly without the cars. If we really can think about the future and working towards a transit focused lifestyle. I think it's possible. And so we have 2 BART stations. One decision that was made recently, it was about a year ago, was the decision, and I think this is really unfortunate, the decision to use the CINO-led developer group at the Naval Weapons Station. And there's all the obvious reasons why that was bad, but I think that one of the impact on the community that I think is really unfortunate is the lack of the complete distrust that people feel in the process now. There are, I think that going forward, there's so many people that just are so frustrated with that decision, and it just doesn't help put trust in our leadership in our city, and that's really unfortunate.
So it seemed, from your perspective, to be a choice that was out of alignment with the voices that were coming to City Council.
Yes. And, Concord Communities Alliance had 1,800 signatures on a petition following that decision. 1,800 people signed a petition saying, reverse this decision. This is a terrible decision, especially in light of the fact that there were two other good developer teams that day. We could have avoided a lot of this angst and animosity in the city over a developer that has just an egregious history of criminal background as well.
Thank you. So that gives us a sense of a few things that you feel grateful for, and then one that you're concerned about. And it sounds like the one that you're concerned about is still in play because the planning process hasn't fully gone through. Is that right, with the CINO developer?
Yeah, the developer team has been given an extension. In May, they came to the city council with some demands, and also saying at the same time, this isn't penciling out for us. And by that, they meant that they weren't seeing the rate of return that they wanted on the process. And they were, at that point, I think that a lot of people wanted them to just cut ties at that moment. What they did is they gave the developer another 6 months, 7 months to work it out. My concern is that the community benefits are what will be negotiated down in order to get the developer what they need for their rate of return. And that is something that, this is a developer that's local. They knew very well going into the process what is important in the community, because the community has been working on this plan for over a decade. So the affordable housing, the veterans housing, there's supposed to be a university campus there and tournament fields. There's all these community benefits that have been worked into the plan. And it also includes good jobs for our union building tradespeople, which is really important. Concord is a union town. I'm a union member. I work for Children's Hospital. I'm a member of NUHW. So I support good jobs. I support apprenticeship programs. But my concern right now is that the developer is not going to make good on the community benefits.
And so maybe, Laura, that relates to the other question, which is, how would you describe your negotiation style? So let's imagine forward to you being elected to city council, and now you are sitting with colleagues who may be strongly in support of this developer, maybe not. What do you bring to the table? Like, how would you move through that?
It could be a challenge for me. I'm one vote, and it depends on what the makeup of the council is going to be. So I'm going to stand strong on what I believe for the community and the people who I represent. And I will have to, when it comes to decisions at the city council level, the developer is going to need at a minimum 3 votes, and I'm only one. So if I disagree, it may be tricky for me if I just disagree with decisions that are coming at us. But I think there's a lot of community support, and I think that what needs to happen is that the residents need to get engaged in the process so that their representatives hear them and understand that the council members represent the people in the city.
So no matter where you sit no matter what your role is, you're letting us all know it's for all of us to be involved.
Yes. Yes. I'm one vote. I need support. Each of the, that's the job of the residents, is to get engaged, to let us know what you feel, what your opinion is, so that we can make decisions based on what we're hearing.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Thank you. Again, just reviewing our list here of questions. I think we've covered all of them.
We've covered a lot.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, we actually have covered all of them. So I want to just actually at this point ask you, is there anything else you want to share in this conversation?
I would like to share that I think it's really important that people get engaged, not only by voting, because I think voting is incredibly undervalued in our society. I think people need to take their vote very seriously. And it's one way of saying that I agree with you, I disagree with you. There are a lot of people who think that my approach is going to be is needed in the city. I think that people, one thing after the election that I really want to be able to maintain is my level of engagement with residents, especially in District 5, which is oftentimes very, I don't think people really understand what's going on in our city. And so having engagement with them and making sure that people are, talking to each other, I think it's really important. And I'd like to see more dialogue in our city about things that are impacting the lives of families.
So okay, you are actually getting into a little bit of your negotiation style, because I hear you saying, I'm going to stand firm. And I also hear you saying you have data to support where you're standing on the thing that you're standing for, or the things that you're standing for. You're coming into it with knowledge, and with having been briefed, and having a nuanced understanding of why you're holding the position you're holding. And yet I'm also hearing you say dialogue.
Dialogue's incredibly important. Yeah.
Right. And so, if we get ourselves out of that road rage mentality of, I'm just going to run the other person over with a car because they don't agree with me, and how could they be so foolish as to not understand where I'm coming from? Deep breath, right? Deep breath. Yeah. And let's talk. Dialogue means the back and forth of ideas. Let's hear, let's listen, let's pause, so that we have more data.
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, that road rage incident that happens on our roadways, that's your neighbor. It's highly likely that you could pull into the same street and park next to each other. It's your neighbor.
Or the same supermarket parking lot, and now you're
reaching for the same apple. Right. So I think that dialogue is incredibly important. I think it's what we're missing. We're living in very divided times, and it's time for us to come together and talk about what we want, what the vision is that we see for our city, and for our communities.
Well, I agree, and that's why I invited you. And
thank you.
Thank you so much for taking me up on that offer. Really appreciate learning from you and hearing in depth what you're bringing to the ballot box.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. This has been nice to sit and chat with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh, sure. It's my pleasure. And so hopefully I'll be also hosting Tim. Invitation's gone out, and I feel like we all move through our daily routine, and you as candidates are moving through your candidacy differently. So I want to be respectful to his decision to participate or not participate, but I do want people to know that it was equally extended to you both, in the spirit of dialogue, in the spirit of neighborliness, and in the spirit of making an informed decision together, when we go vote. So Thank you for accepting the invitation.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.